So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. This to CompassioKNIT, Knitting for Well-Being with Amanda Brothers. Thank you for joining us, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Amanda, and she'll be able to walk us through a little bit about what we have prepared tonight.
Hi everyone, my name's Amanda, and my presentation this evening is on CompassioKNIT, a new program that we're going to start in partnership with Altman Hospital. So let me just get into it here. So a little bit about me, who I am, kind of the inspiration behind what I'm doing here. So I am local, I'm from Minerva, Ohio. I'm a self-taught crocheter turned knitter. In college, I really saw all these things on Pinterest, things that I've seen that people have made. And I'm like, you know what, I think that'd be a good idea to try and do that myself. So just using YouTube, I taught myself how to crochet, did that for quite a few years. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to step it up a notch and try to teach myself how to knit. And it was kind of hard in the beginning. I didn't have anyone showing me how to do it. I was just trying to do it by YouTube and just watching YouTube videos over and over. Practicing, and I finally got it. And so ever since then, these are just some little examples of things that I've made, things I've made for family, friends, nieces, nephews, you name it. So I just really enjoy knitting, you know, as a hobby, as a therapeutic kind of release for myself, and just wanted to share that with other people. Also a little bit more about me, I guess I put on here. I have a degree in social work from Malone University. I have some experience working with people in the community setting, and something that I really enjoyed to do. And I've also worked at Altman since 2018 and a current employee there too. So I know a little bit about how the hospital works and kind of about what patients experience when they're there in the hospital. So that kind of was part of why CompassioKNIT was something that I decided to try to get started. And just for a disclaimer, I'm no expert in knitting. I just like to do it, and I found ways to make it work for me and things that I enjoy. So I just know that this is something that's therapeutic, and there's been a lot of research even too, just about how beneficial it is for people in all different types of situations as a therapeutic kind of activity. So that's kind of the whole basis for this presentation and what we're trying to do with CompassioKNIT. So for today, I have a little bit of an agenda for what we're going to go over. So we're going to talk just a little bit about the basics of knitting and kind of what it is, and how we can teach other people to do it. There's some good research out there about the benefits of knitting, so I thought that that would be impactful to include here, just kind of see how it can help people. And then also that includes the inspiration behind forming CompassioKNIT and what I'm going to talk about. And then also just how we can get involved, what we can do with knitting. I'm just going to skip over this real quick. So first thing first, a lot of people don't really understand quite what knitting is. So it is different than crochet. A lot of people get those terms kind of mixed up. So knitting itself is used with two pointy needles, or you can use like a circular needle where it's connected. So most people do this by hand, but you can also do it with a machine, with a little loom, all types of ways to knit. The one thing that's different about knitting versus crocheting is that if you drop a stitch, it can cause a lot of issues. So in teaching someone how to do that, you need to really explain how you can pick up those drop stitches, but we won't get into that right now. So then crochet is a little different. So it's just one single crochet hook, and you always have to do it by hand. You can't use any sort of different other tools. But the one positive is it's less likely to unravel. So for CompassioKNIT, we're just going to be focusing on knitting, but I like this little graphic to kind of show how the differences are. And so there's a little bit of cool knitting history. I did some little research just to include here. So the oldest thing that they found that's a knitted artifact is a pair of socks from Egypt, dating back to the 11th century. So and there was things before then. So knitting has been around for a super long time. At one time, it was a male-only occupation as well. So that's kind of interesting that women weren't really doing it, even though now most people think that it's primarily women that are knitting. And I included this cool little poster that I found that was in World War I. Men, women, and children at home would knit clothes, accessories, socks, sweaters, all kinds of things for the troops in World War I and send it off to them. So I just thought that was a cool little piece of history to include about knitting. So just the simple basics of knitting and what we would teach someone that's new. Really all it is, it's not that complicated. It's really just connecting little loops of yarn together and pulling them through each other. That's really the basics of it. So there's just basically 2 stitches to every knit item, besides putting the yarn on the needles and all the other things that go into once you're a little more expert level. So the first one would be the knit stitch, and this is some people call it the garter stitch. So I have a little diagram off to the side here that kind of just demonstrates it, and it's pretty simple. You just put the needle in, pull over the yarn, pull it back out, and pull it up. And that's really it. You just do that all the way along. So that's what gives you that nice knit type of look where you're just putting the needle in, pulling up, and making a stitch. So purl stitch is kind of the opposite of a knit stitch. So you're kind of doing it backwards. So you put it in the front, loop over, and then pull it out. But really, those are the 2 basic things that any new knitter would learn how to do and how to make something that's pretty simple. So that's really all there is to it. You just flip back and forth on the needles, but those are the 2 main stitches. So this is just an example of a stockinette stitch, just your most basic knitting stitch. So the knit side looks like, as you can see on the left there, it's nice and uniform, and then the purl side is what you see on the right, and that's just when you do all the purls, it's kind of the bumpy look on the back. So for a very basic piece of something that's knitted, that's what it would look like on either side. And then just for a little info on yarns, and the other thing that you need other than needles, there's a lot of different types of things that you see on a yarn label, so it can get kind of confusing. The basic thing that I really pay attention to is just the yarn weight, which you can see in the middle there. There's a little diagram with it says medium 4. So the numbers range from 1 to 7, and that's really just how thick your yarn is. So you use the type of yarn depending on the kind of needles that you're using. So if you're using thicker yarn, you use bigger needles, smaller yarn, smaller needles. But there's a lot of information on a yarn label. So, but that's the main takeaway from that. There's a lot of information on how to launder it, what kind of needles to use to get the specific gauge, they call it. So there's a lot of verbiage and things on this yarn label. But that's what it typically looks like. And I also have a little bit of research, of course, to kind of show why knitting is good for you. So there's a lot of research that's happened that shows that it improves your motor function. So obviously, primarily in your fingers. It can lower your heart rate and blood pressure, particularly probably because you're sitting and keeping busy with your fingers, and gives you kind of a slow pace. So along with the motor function, it can help with arthritic symptoms in your fingers to kind of help keep them agile. It's been shown to reduce the stress hormone level, cortisol. So when you're doing the activity of knitting, it's kind of releasing and you're lowering that. And it also improves brain function as you age. So if you're a knitter, you know that there's some work that goes into it. You have to do some math, you have to follow a pattern, you have to kind of use your brain to do it. It's not super simple. So of course it's going to help your brain to function a little better when you're using it while you're knitting. And then just finally, you end up with a tangible and useful handmade item that you can use for yourself, give to someone else, and just experience that satisfaction of completing something and being able to give something handmade to someone else. Well, there's a little more to that too. There's been a lot of research also to show that knitting is pretty therapeutic. And if you go to the source, there is a great blog in the New York Times about the health benefits of knitting that has kind of organized a lot of the research in a good way. They've shown that knitting is a good therapy for smoking cessation. So groups that are trying to work on quitting smoking, it's a good thing to keep their hands busy so they're not as apt to reach for a cigarette when they're having a craving. Coping with health crises and diagnoses, there's a lot of very serious diagnoses that people have found knitting to be a good therapeutic activity for them to kind of put their mind on something else other than their diagnosis. They've shown that it's really great for people with mental health conditions, improving mood, helping refocus attention. gives you something else to focus on other than maybe some mental health issues that they're experiencing, and to lessen their symptoms. And so whenever you get to do this in a group as a therapeutic activity with other people, it really is great mentally. And they've even found there's been some positive effects of crafting. I don't know about knitting specifically, but just crafting in general in the prison system as well, and also in the school system. Really helps with social skills and math skills. Like I said, there's actually quite a bit of math that goes into knitting, and just learning how to count stitches and all of those sorts of things. So it can be great even for younger kids to work on their math skills. And there's also more. So I found out that you can burn up to 55 calories knitting for 1 hour. So that's pretty great. And not to mention, knitting has been beneficial for dieters. Obviously, it keeps their hands a little busy so they can avoid overeating. So it can even be used as a diet plan, believe it or not. All right. So I'm kind of transitioning here. So Project Knitwell is kind of what was my inspiration for starting CompassioKNIT. This is a nonprofit organization. They're based out of Washington, D.C. They have really great resources for folks that want to start some form of volunteer hospital knitting program. And they publish this great guide of how to start one yourself. And so that's what I kind of stumbled upon, and what's kind of been the inspiration for what we want to try to do at Altman. So they have this great video that I'm going to play here, so we can kind of see what Project Knitwell is about and learn a little bit more.
Project Knitwell is a nonprofit organization that I started 6 years ago, 2010. And I started it as a result of being the mom of a pediatric patient.
We have Project Knitwell come twice a week. Carol comes on Mondays and Maggie and Annie come on Fridays. They come and they check in with us generally. We give them a list of patients and potential parents that we think might be interested or benefit from knitting. And then they go room to room and they, introduce themselves and they say, "Are you interested in learning how to knit today?" And the patients and families will either say, "Yes, I can't wait," or, "No thanks, maybe another day." And so we just kind of try to set them up with good candidates for the program.
Two oncology nurses did a study where they found that knitting was a positive intervention on compassion fatigue among nurses. And they recently, in February of this year, had this study published in the Clinical Journal of Oncology Nursing. And it showed that knitting did help reduce burnout among nurses. So we work with, as I mentioned, in hospital settings, and we also work in a number of community settings as well. And in DC, those include Ronald McDonald House Charities, where parents and other family members stay while their children are being treated at hospitals. Also at the Smith Center for Healing in the Arts, we have a thriving weekly knitting group there, and the focus of the Smith Center is to use arts, obviously, as a form of healing.
We're one group that comes into a hospital that has nothing to do with the medical aspects of the patient. We're not there to give any test results. We're not poking anybody with a needle. We're just there to teach them a skill. We give them beautiful yarns to work with. Knitting is very sensory. It's beautiful to look at, it's beautiful to feel. So we hope that, for the period of time that we're working with them, that we make a difference.
Most young people want to make something right away. They want to make a hat or a scarf, something. And that's part of the fun. I think it's also one of the nice differences about knitting in a hospital setting, which is sort of future-oriented. They'll say, "Oh, I'm going to make a scarf and wear it to the football game next fall." And these are patients who've been in the hospital for months, or mothers who want to knit something for their babies to wear home. So there's that sense of, I'm looking to the future. But it's also, knitting, as we've heard today, is a very in-the-moment experience, very much in the moment, very present, and it keeps you right here with each stitch and each breath and each thought.
My daughter Emily is one of the loves of my life. Emily is now a nurse in the pediatric ICU unit here at MedStar Georgetown. So So she's on the exact same unit where she was rushed to when she was 8 days old.
The knitting, although it seems like a simple thing, kind of a small little thing, it's one way to bring a little of the outside world in.
All right, so I just thought that was a really good video that kind of covers what Project Knitwell is and the inspiration behind trying to start something like this at Altman. So their website is projectknitwell.org too. If you want to kind of learn a little bit more, they have a lot of information and details and resources for what they do and how they function. So as you could kind of gather from the video, there's quite a few benefits to having some form of a hospital knitting program. Hospital stays are very stressful for patients, families that have to wait often days to find out results or get any resolution to leave, parents in the NICU, all those types of things. So having a lengthy hospital stay can really compound that stress and increase that anxiety. So knitting is great for the hospital environment for quite a few reasons. So participants can knit from a bed, a chair, wheelchair. They don't have to go anywhere. They can do it right from, their hospital room. So if you can just get them connected to a volunteer to teach them, it's pretty simple. You don't need any sort of artistic talent either. It's just using your fingers and looping holes on needles. So that's really it. So you don't have to be great artists or anything like that. It can also provide an opportunity for socialization, get people to engage in relationships that aren't connected to their illness. So someone they can connect with on a personal level that's not surrounded by their illness or focused on that. So that's a great positive to having this type of service in a hospital. So a little bit just about kind of adapting to COVID-19 and what Project Netwell has done in their situation. They've moved into doing some virtual lessons with patients, family members, staff, anyone that wants to participate. And so they're just doing this via Zoom. So any participant would just be provided like with a big beginner's kit, just like they would have normally. So this just gives them yarn, needles, and a little bit of instructions. They get connected to Zoom they get connected to Zoom to an instructor, and then they can just do it like they would normally. It'll just have to be a little bit adapted to COVID-19. So that's what we were looking at, trying that. And we're just getting started. So CompassioKNIT was inspired by Project Knitwell just to see how we can do this in our own community and see how we can get some volunteer knitters to get involved. Just form a group to begin with and get some people on board to see where we can start. So just in short, there's just a few things for anyone that wants to be a part of CompassioKNIT. So the idea is to have a short training for volunteers because there's some methods that come along with it for teaching participants. First, we're going to just teach people basic skills of knitting. And then as you move on, they can even work with the same volunteer to work on a little bit harder projects, make some more items, that sort of thing. And we would just expect a volunteer to be able to keep some good records of doing these knitting lessons so that we can see if it's beneficial and see how we can improve. And also be willing and comfortable teaching via Zoom. That's kind of a little hurdle for people to use that as a way to teach someone. So this is just something that we might have to have some training on as well until we could do any in-person lessons. So if anyone is interested in joining a volunteer knit group, I just have a quick brief survey. It's about 5 questions just to get some contact info, name, just some more information. So in the event that we can start having even just a small group get together to see where we can go with it, we just want to get that started and see what people's availability is like to have that happen. So we can definitely share that survey link with folks via email, or I can also share it and be connected by my email as well.